GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
We're chatting with Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. Welcome back to the show, Hilliard.
Nice to be on your show again, Jim.
The Real Estate Council of BC did a short investigation on how to perhaps make the market a little more affordable. 28 recommendations, amongst them much higher fines, $250,000 and $500,000 for agencies and agents who are involved in misconduct. But they still say the industry can regulate itself, can it?
You know, self-regulation is something we've had in the financial markets for decades and decades, and I was the chair of the Alberta division of the Investment Dealers Association, which is kind of like an industry lobby group and also the regulator. So all of the people have to get a license to sell securities, and there has to be a certain amount of capital in the investment firms and all that sort of thing. And they finally, a few years ago, probably I would say 10 or 15 years ago, they finally decided that was inappropriate to have the two of them together. So, because really the authority for the regulation of the industry comes from the government. There's a Alberta Securities Act. Every province has one. BC has one. And the rules are set out in there, and then they delegate that authority to an industry body that regulates the industry. And I remember sitting on, one of the things you did, and chair is a volunteer job. You don't get paid for it. But one of the things happened is somebody screws up, does something wrong. And the one case I remember, the fellow had been promoting gold mining stocks. And it wasn't necessarily bad that he was doing that, but he did it in such a way with a certain amount of advertising and different things that it was inappropriate according to the rules. So we had a panel, and I sat as a chair, and then there was a lawyer, and then he had a lawyer. And we were supposed to assess this and decide what fine to give him. And the problem is that you're sitting there in judgment of your peers, and the guy, it really, in this case, I'm sure, was just kind of ignorant and maybe not too bright, and he just stumbled into a mistake, which was going to basically cost him his career, right? So we were there, so the feeling you have when you're sitting on that panel is, well, this could have happened to me if I just, maybe made this mistake or something. And so you go easy on him because you feel sorry for him. And so I remember that feeling was just a horrible feeling, like to have to sit in judgment and then put a fine on him and all that kind of stuff. So you really do tend to go easy. So, and that was in the mid-90s when I was doing that. And so since then, they've decided that that's not correct, and they will take that function away from the industry association. And of course, that was just my experience. I'm sure there's all kinds of opportunities for much worse kind of situations where the people on the panel would also have connections, business connections to the people that were being judged and fined, and maybe even all kinds of things could go on. So it's just not appropriate. And so I think the real estate industry has to do what the financial services industry did probably 2 decades ago and separate the two functions. And so you can have the BC Real Estate Council being a lobby group, and you could have some other agency probably controlled more by the government that could be the. But I was shocked to. I mean, I didn't realize. I don't know how many people realize this, that real estate agents could represent both the buyer and the seller at the same time. That seems crazy to me. Like that, that's setting aside the regulatory thing. That just seems like, economics 101 that you don't want to have, or legal 101. You don't want to have the same person representing both sides of a transaction.
Well, they'll be changing that on BC, and BC Premier Christy Clark says the province will take away the real estate industry's ability to regulate itself. She said even though an independent panel said, they can still do that, look after themselves. She said instead the Real Estate Council of BC can no longer be trusted to do the job and will instead transfer those powers to the province's superintendent of real estate. Was that an expected move?
Well, I think that's similar to what happened in the financial services industry. And really, the BC Real Estate Group was always operating under the authority of the superintendent of real estate as a government person, but it was just delegated. So I suspect what she's saying is that they're no longer going to delegate it to this body because they can't trust them anymore, I guess. And, as long as it didn't make the government look bad, it was fine, right? But as soon as it started making the government look bad and maybe affect them politically, then they don't want it. It actually has a benefit in the sense for the government, in the sense if they delegate it, then if something goes wrong, then they don't have to own the responsibility for it. But it sounds, reading what I've been reading and watching, this thing is so big. This is a huge mess in Vancouver, and the government can't avoid carrying some of the blame for what's gone wrong there. I don't know if we want to talk about the vote in Britain, but I wrote up a piece on it in my weekend note that's just coming out today, and I was reading a lot of stuff about why people voted to leave the European Union, and I didn't see this written very often by anybody else, but I think it's a factor, and that is that people in England primarily watched all of the money laundering that was going on in London, which was pushing real estate prices higher and higher, and they just felt left out. And they saw all these people coming from Europe and from Russia and all these different places, and that had all this money, and nobody really seems to know where they get this money. There's obviously some of them don't get it illegally, or they want to hide it in some way, and London real estate was a perfect place to do it, and that seems to be the same thing that's happening in Vancouver. You can hide money in Vancouver real estate. However, it's become so well known now, I think that it's getting more and more difficult to hide it in Vancouver real estate. I read a story just this morning about people coming up to a place where they were holding an auction for Vancouver real estate, but there were cameras there, and so all the people that drove up just turned around and got back in their cars and drove away because they did not want to be seen on camera. So obviously there's some secrecy involved there, and it reminds me of when I was in Macau and I went and visited the casinos there, as I was amazed to learn that the total annual gambling revenue in Macau is bigger than the total take in Las Vegas. And when I went to Macau, it's like maybe a tenth the size of Las Vegas. Probably not even a tenth. It's probably 1/20th the size of Las Vegas. And then you walk through the casinos, and there's hardly any people in the casinos. And so I asked somebody, I said, what is going on? Like the volume of gambling is bigger here than Las Vegas, but there's no people. And the answer was, nobody wants to be seen because they don't want to be known as somebody who has the kind of money that it takes to gamble in the high rollers room. So they come in secretly through a back door and nobody ever sees who they are. So maybe Macau and the Vancouver real estate market are operating in a similar fashion, in that it's a place to get money out and it's a place to hide the fact that you have a lot of money.
Premier Clark said one thing that they can probably do right away with some of these recommendations is set up a consumer whistleblower line. If they feel they've been ripped off or they've been dealt with improperly, they can report it.
Yeah, and that it's in the securities industry, it's called the ombudsman, and it exists. And usually people first go to the company, like it would be in this case the real estate agency, and complain. And then if they don't get any answer, they then try and go to someplace else and ask for help. But in the one case that was publicized, I guess a couple of months ago, the fellow got death threats. So maybe he wants to be anonymous as he doesn't want people to know. I mean, I think we may have talked about this before, but it still amazes me that it doesn't get more publicity. And because the same rules that apply to investment advisors apply to real estate agents. And that is simply that if you don't know the source of the money, if you suspect that the money might be coming from terrorism or money laundering or criminal activities, you are required as the real estate agent or as the financial services advisor to report those people. And it's a law. And not only that, if you don't report them, there's a huge fine and even jail sentence that might be applied. And also, you're not allowed to tell them that you're going to report them. So if somebody comes in with a bundle of money and I can't determine what the source of it is and it looks suspicious to me, I have to report it to my branch manager, and then he reports it to the firm, and then the firm reports it to the government agency. And the fact that this hasn't happened, I talked to a real estate agent in Vancouver a couple of years ago, and I said, how do you determine the source of this money? And don't you have to report it? Like, isn't that the law? And they said, well, there's this form we have to sign. And I said, well, how do you determine the source of the money? And they said, we couldn't possibly determine the source of the money. We just signed the form. I said, don't you get into trouble? And they said, no, we haven't so far, So, I mean, if that is a real change, I mean, if you're talking, if what Christy Clark's talking about and the real estate council is talking about and the superintendent of real estate is talking about, actually applying those laws that already exist. You don't need new laws. It's going to be a huge change because it is very difficult with people that are coming from another country to really get us the full story as to whose money really is it, In the case of that one that just came out a couple of days ago with $100 million, people wouldn't have even known that money was borrowed. And this has been one thing that in my research I discovered was there's a huge real estate bubble in China, and a lot of the money is borrowed money that has propped up the real estate bubble, and very similar to Canada. And so there's almost no chance, there's almost no doubt possible that a lot of the money that's coming in to Vancouver real estate, and even in Edmonton and Calgary real estate, and Toronto real estate from outside, from China or other areas, is borrowed money, not real cash savings. And if there's any problem back home with a bank, as there is in this case with the $100 million guy, then there's going to be big trouble, because the bank's going to want to get the loan repaid.
Right.
So,
the Chinese government wants to seize the real estate he owns in Vancouver.
Yeah, and I don't even know I guess they have it. It depends on whether the government of Canada, the province of British Columbia, the RCMP are willing to cooperate with them. I suspect they are, because the banks probably operate in China, and the Chinese bank probably operates in Canada. But the difference in China is the banks are all owned and controlled by the government. They trade on the stock market. All of the big banks in China trade on the stock market, but all of the big banks in China, the majority of the shares, usually 60, 70, 80% of the shares, are owned by the government, which basically means the Communist Party controls the government. So the Communist Party of China basically is trying to repatriate the money on this loan. And because the laws in China are different from the laws in Canada, I don't know necessarily whether the authorities will be willing to cooperate with them, but I have heard anecdotally that is one way people get money out of China, is by borrowing money both in China and in Canada, and then defaulting on the loan in Canada, and have the Canadian bank seize the collateral in China. So it could work the other way too. You could have the Canadian bank facilitating the transfer of money out of China by recovering money from an asset in China. It's just a crazy world that we live in, and but it gets back to the fact that the borrowing of money to buy real estate, it's extremely exaggerated in Canada. Canada's probably second only to Australia in terms of the level of indebtedness and the real estate bubble that is currently in place. But it's a worldwide phenomenon. Like all of the banks all over the world are engaged in lending money against real estate as collateral because they view it as the safest possible asset that they can loan against. Because generally prices go up, but then unless the bubble bursts, prices go up, and if the person can't pay the loan off, the bank's still okay because it can seize the asset and then it can sell it. So that's why the Chinese bank wants to seize the assets in Vancouver, because they could probably get their whole loan paid back if they can sell. But imagine a situation where four or five banks, maybe some Canadian, some China banks, are all trying to seize properties at the same time, and you're talking 20 or 30 properties. Well, you put 20 or 30 $5 million properties on the market at the same time, it might be too much. It could be the straw that broke the camel's back.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after the break.
GEM International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. GEM International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. Hilliard, some people have suggested to me that both the provincial and federal governments have known for some time that basically the real estate bubble in Vancouver and Toronto is an act of money laundering. However, they're making so much money from it with transfer taxes and so on, they're turning a blind eye to it for the most part.
I'd be surprised if they know the full extent of it, and I think they would be, the people that work for the government aren't making the money, so the government as a whole might be getting all these taxes, especially the transfer taxes in Ontario, quite a substantial amount of money. But the government official that's got the responsibility to regulate this is not getting any part of those things, other than maybe it pays his salary or her salary. But I think there is a feeling, and I've run into this with senior lenders and senior investment people and senior government people. There's a feeling that nobody wants to be the one that's responsible for putting a wrench into the gears and causing the whole thing to grind to a halt, because everybody is doing so well with it. Everybody feels great when their house price goes from 500,000 to $1 million, or 1 million to 1.5 million. And most of the people involved in the system, whether they work for the bank or the lender or the government, they probably own a house themselves. So they're personally also feeling good about the fact that house prices keep rising and rising. And who wants to be the one that says that gets blamed for bringing a halt to it? So I think more, there's this concept in law. I didn't study law, but I took a course on business law. And I remember one of the interesting concepts is something called willful blindness. So willful blindness is not a defense. So if you deliberately look the other way because there's something there, but you don't want to have to deal with it, you don't want to have to be forced to act on it, so you deliberately just sort of look away, and you say, well, I didn't see anything, I didn't see it, so therefore there's nothing wrong. I would guess that that's probably more likely it. This is a case of people not wanting to rock the boat. And now, to use an example from the U.S., because so much has happened in the U.S. a few years ago, in the case of Bernie Madoff, and the analogy isn't perfect, obviously, because Bernie Madoff was a very unusual situation, but the Ponzi scheme that he was running, there were several investigations at the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is the regulator in the United States, initiated by the staff at the SEC, the lower echelon staff at the SEC, because there was a whistleblower who actually contacted them and continued to contact them. And his argument, which turned out to be completely valid and accurate, was that there's no way that this person could be making these returns because there's no asset in the world that you could buy that would yield that kind of return. So, and somehow at the higher echelons of the SEC, every single one of these investigations, I think there was 2 or 3 or 4, all of them got stopped. And it would have had to be, if you're a junior person and you're working on this investigation, I can't imagine that you would want to stop it. It would be like the file of a lifetime to be digging into this. And if you found something, you want to do more and more and more. And so it would take a senior person to come to you and say, you know what, forget about that file. I don't want you to pursue it. And so that would be the next step, and that would be where. But nobody at the senior levels of the SEC has ever been charged or even questioned. And somehow, mysteriously, all of the files related to those investigations that were opened got destroyed somehow in some kind of a mistake. So yeah, who knows where this thing might go? I mean, it is possible, what you say, that there are people at the senior levels that are deliberately putting a halt to anybody looking into this. But I think it's more likely, it's a little bit less, it's more innocent than the Bernie Madoff thing. And it's just that nobody wants to rock the boat. And definitely nobody wants to be the person that gets blamed for bringing this wonderful gravy train to a halt. Maybe the guy that wrote the book about the bubble bursting will get the blame. I don't know, but it doesn't really matter. In the end, all of these things are symptoms of a bubble, and all bubbles burst eventually. So the after the fact, looking around for who to blame and what kind of things happened, I'm sure will be some surprises. But in the end, it doesn't really matter to that person who borrowed $700,000 to buy an $800,000 house, which is now worth $600,000. They're still upside down on their mortgage, and they've still got a huge problem. And unfortunately, an awful lot of people are going to get hurt.
Hilliard, thank you so much for chatting with us.
It's great to be on the show again, Jim.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. Hilliard, where can people find that book?
Well, you can go on the website, themacbethgroup.com, or you can find it at Amazon or Chapters or Indigo, any of the booksellers and online services. Everybody has it.
Once again, thank you very much, Hilliard. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be emailed to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.